India looks to Africa for new opportunities, and a partnership it says will be based on Africa's needs, not exploitation. So is New Delhi offering something different? And how much of a threat is it to China's dominance on the continent right now? This is Inside Story. So we've got lots to discuss on today's Inside Story, so we should introduce the panel. Let's start in Washington, D.C. with Amadou Sy. He is the director of the Africa Growth Initiative. In Johannesburg is Shanti Pai, economist for the consultancy firm Nascence Advisory and Research. And rounding out the panel in New Delhi is Sreeram Chaulia, executive director of the Centre for Global Governance and Policy. Gentlemen, thank you. Pleasure to have you with us on Inside Story. Sreeram, let me start with you in New Delhi. This summit itself, before we get into the relationship, let's talk about the summit itself. The fact that Narendra Modi and the Indian government have managed to get leaders and players and business people from every single African country to come, that's a big win in the first instance, isn't it?
It is. It is a vote of confidence on the part of Africa's leadership about India, and I think they look at India with a great deal of hope and optimism and expectation, and this is a sign that India has arrived on the big stage in many ways, because the previous summits we've had with African nations have been rather small and selective. Groupings of 10 to 15 countries only. So it's Delhi is looking like the capital of the developing world these days, this week. Everywhere it's the talk is about Africa and how we can march together towards new horizons. Both of us are rising centers, power centers, and increasingly the view is that South-South cooperation is going to take a fresh turn and move in new directions with the push that Prime Minister Modi is giving, especially towards the African continent, because in the past there has been a sense that we have not really lived up to the potential of this relationship, but now it seems like we are going full steam in terms of hosting leaders, but also in terms of expanding the agenda. Many more issues are on the platter, and it looks like this is actually a grand summit that we are witnessing in Delhi.
And just to speak briefly to Prime Minister Modi himself, it almost feels to me like it's part of his world tour, because he has made a big point in his first year of going to see so many different leaders around the world, and now he brings a whole lot of them to him as well. This is clearly part of his strategy, isn't it?
Yes, some people have called it his diplomatic homecoming, because he's been itinerant, mostly outside the country, and now he's hosting a grand summit like this with more than 40 heads of government and state from Africa. So I think, yes, it is spreading Indian influence around the world, and they see it as part of the story of our expansion as a major power in the world. And especially with Africa, I think the softer elements are at play, development assistance, trade, of course, as you mentioned, and also human capital building and skill enhancement and transfer of technology, low cost, innovations, all the things that will provide life chances to Africans and also, of course, benefit India. So that's what we are seeing here. It's a mutually beneficial win-win kind of cooperative move that's happening.
Africa has always been on India's radar. There are long-standing ties. Sreeram, let me ask you what you think about how India capitalizes on that. And again, we have to look at the China element here, how it does something different, how it leverages itself to become a stronger player.
Geographically speaking, India is a lot closer to the African continent than China is. And we share a common littoral region which stretches from the Arabian Sea all the way up to the Gulf of Aden. So the Western Indian Ocean is basically a common home for a lot of African countries and of course for India. So that distinguishes us from China. And secondly, and that has implications, remember, for transport costs, for burgeoning trade and all these things, the geographical proximity. The second point, of course, is the cultural affinity, as my colleague has just pointed out. We have close to 3 million Indians, a large diaspora in Africa, and these have settled and have integrated, have become local citizens. These are not like an enclave economy model that the Chinese bring temporary workers and set up settlements to build roads and highways. These are actually, naturalized citizens of most of these countries. Many of them contributed to freedom struggles against apartheid. As you know, the ANC in South Africa, for example, has very many Indian leaders, people of Indian origin. And so all these are obviously cultural factors that bind us together, and we will be leveraging Chinese. Prime Minister Modi often plays up the diaspora aspect, and he has actually raised the quantum of our diplomacy towards the diaspora. And I think whenever he visits the African continent, one can be sure that he will be trying to leverage and tap into the energies of the diaspora, many of whom actually have a kind of a cultural closeness to Mother India. So he refers to all of them as children of India, no matter where they are. Right. We have changed our attitude towards the diaspora under Prime Minister Modi. We have, treated them not as stepchildren who have forgotten the motherland, but rather as our assets on the ground in many parts of the world. So I think these will distinguish us. I want to also mention what distinguishes us from China, of course, is our commitment to human resource development. I mean, it's not just that we are extracting minerals and that we are following the Chinese path. I must say that on the other hand, we are building the human capital needs of Africa in a big way. We have been doing training of trainers from everything from cattle rearing to bamboo manufacturing to solar electricity. So there is a wide range of projects that are being discussed at the summit and will be implemented, which basically talk about how to raise the life chances of ordinary Africans. And even our enterprises hire far many more local Africans than Chinese do. Even our enterprises have far less of a carbon footprint. So in terms of energy intensity of production also, Indian corporations have done far better, and it's a proven fact. Okay. So all these mean that actually both Africa and India are late industrializing regions, and both of them have complementarity. We don't compete that much. When we export, we are not depriving African local producers or causing injury to their local production. Rather, we are only competing against other exporters to Africa. So I think all of this improves the consumer welfare in Africa and preserves jobs.
India is looking abroad for investment and opportunity, but there are problems to think about closer to home too. Just a few numbers to think about. Around 360 million Indians living in poverty in 2012, according to the National Planning Commission, which is about 30% of the population. Around 400 million people don't have access to electricity, and even those who do experience frequent power cuts. And a third of the illiterate adults in the world are in India. And one more thing, government corruption costs about $6 billion every year. Sreeram, this is one for you here, and I know this is a really easy thing to say, that why spend money there when you could be spending money at home? But I still think it's worth asking. The Indian government and Indian businesses have a lot to do at home before they go fixing up Africa.
No, I don't see a contradiction between pursuing domestic economic development and supporting Africa's rise, because these days, we're talking about an interdependent world. We cannot rise when our fellow developing countries are stuck at the bottom, so we rise together. And that's the whole idea of South-South cooperation, that through trade as well as through skill transfer and through human resource capacity building, we can actually improve. For example, Africa has a demographic dividend. The average age is like 19 or 20, and India is also in a sweet spot, at least for the next couple of decades. So we have like really young populations with a lot of aspirations, and we have done things to be able to fulfill the aspirations on both sides. So for example, we have this Pan-African e-network that does telemedicine, teleeducation, health, animal husbandry, and so on. And all of these are training a lot of African youth to improve their life chances, but also giving opportunities to young Indians. So I think, yes, there is a section in India which still says, let's fix our house first before going out. But I think we are past that stage now. We cannot afford to lose whatever we want to call it, a race or whatever, to great power status. I think the Indian government has now, under Prime Minister Modi, stated that we must attempt to become a leading power in the world. And for that, we cannot wait another 20 years until, our home is fixed. And I think, frankly, through exchange, we're going to actually raise value on both sides. And the era of, sequential foreign policy after domestic policy is over now. We are talking about a government that wants to increase Make in India. And Make in India is a flagship project of the Prime Minister Modi and can only happen with African resources. Yeah. And there is also talk about Make in Africa, and the African visitors here in Delhi are saying, why don't you also come and make in Africa? And there, our small and medium enterprises can do it.
Thank you for joining us on Inside Story.